Welcome to the course MSD 014 Ecosystem Economics. Discussion will be on carbon trading and tradable permits, another important topic on ecosystem economics. So, tradable permits are something that you might have heard and some of you might not have heard, and these are basically another type of market based policy instrument under which right to discharge pollution or exploit resources can be exchanged through either a free or a controlled permit market. Like taxes, they also generate economic incentives to economic agents to move towards less environmentally harmful behavior. As used to date, they have mainly impacted directly on the firms. Now, the tradable permit schemes as applied under the US Clean Air Act led to reduction of smoke, also reduction of acid rain at a very lower economic cost than it would have been in the case with the command and control instrument used in Germany. Now, it is very clear and it is proven that instruments are there and they are very much successful and they can be applied in another sectors as well. So, comes another question, what is the use of trade permits within a country? Now, trade permits differ from taxes in a very fundamental way. Consider the control of pollution. With taxes, the monetary incentives facing the agent is the fixed price to be paid for each unit of emissions. With permits, the agent faces a quantitative emission target which is fixed by amount of permits held, and the agent can vary her holding by buying or selling permits at a different price. Now, from the point of view of regulatory authority, taxes fix the price at which agents can emit, but not the amount that they emit individually or collectively, whereas permits fix the amount that agents can collectively emit, but not the price at which they do it or the amount they emit individually. So, now that is an important aspect of use of tradable permits within a country. Now, there is another important question. So, how do tradable permit works? A tradable permit is basically an environmental policy instrument which organizes the exchange of rights to discharge a particular kind of waste into some of the environment or to use a certain kind of natural resource. So, while in the former case, instead of being charged for release, one needs to hold a permit to discharge the amount that one actually does discharge. So, the regulatory authority basically sets a limit. This is also expressed in biophysical units on the amount of emissions that permits in existence to be emitted in the environment. Now, by controlling the total number of permits, the regulating authority basically can control the aggregate pollution quantity. While the regulating authority sets the total amount permissible, they do not attempt to determine how that total allowed quantity is allocated among different individual sources of emissions. Now, it is very important to understand that tradable permits are basically based on the principle that can increase in emission from one source must be offset by an equivalent decrease somewhere else. Now, this is the important context with reference to environmental economics and also with reference to climate financing. Sources can vary the amount of permits that they hold and hence their emission levels by buying and selling from one to the other sources. Now, what is the main advantage? So, the main advantage of this scheme is that it is cost effective, it generates dynamic incentives and also helps in cost reduction. The regulatory authority could actually issue a total amount of permits that are equivalent to the allocated efficiency target if it knew what it was or an amount that is equivalent to an arbitrary standard. So, what can be the basic principle? So, the basic principle are basically the same in the case of permits to use a natural resource or a regulatory authority determines what will be the level of use to be and accordingly issues a corresponding total amount of permit. This can be denominated in terms of tons or number of individuals. For example, if you talk about fishing, it can be denominated in terms of fish stock. For carbon, it can be denominated in terms of tons. So 1 ton of carbon is called as 1 carbon credit, that is tradable and can be traded in voluntary carbon markets. Now, once issued by the authority, permits can be either bought or sold among resource harvesting firms and individuals, and that is the same principle that is applied even in carbon trading. Now, there are diverse examples. This includes individual transferable quotas in fisheries, tradable depletion rights to mineral concessions, and marketable discharge permits for waterborne effluents. Now, these are important aspects and examples of individual transferable quotas. Now, coming to international carbon trading advantages, as we have been discussing in our previous discussions, that how important it is to go for trading permits and quotas. So, most of the developing countries so far have failed to implement widespread energy efficiency measures, and so they have been using energy very wastefully, and that is one of the reasons most of the European countries, USA, Japan being developed are also the centers of carbon emissions. There is a huge opportunity actually in such countries to reduce domestic emissions very cost effectively by bringing in an energy efficient measure. So, what can be that energy efficient measure? So, in an emission trading regime, there may well be an incentive for these countries to reduce their domestic emissions below their commitments. This is because the price they could receive for selling their excess reductions, technically excess assigned amount units, may well be higher than the cost to them of reducing the emissions at the very first place. Now, in the absence of an emission trading regime, these countries would have aimed to achieve their commitment, but probably nothing more. However, other countries will be able to purchase these excess assigned amount units and thereby legally increase their emissions above their original commitment. While many economists believe that this system is a very economically effective means of achieving global emission reduction at least cost, there are also counter criticism for the same approach. So, a trading regime basically, therefore, in theory brings about a cost effective reduction in global emissions than otherwise would be the case and produce some other overall economic benefits. This can be a very ideal situation, but there are many ways in which this global emission trading regime can actually go badly, and it can also be considered wrong. Now, again, this tradable permit system runs in two broad ways. First is cap and trade system, and the another is emission reduction credit system. So, now these are two important terminologies that you need to remember when you will be discussing and reading more about the budgeting and carbon trading in voluntary markets. So, the cap and trade scheme basically involves a decision by the regulatory authority about the total quantity of emissions or actually natural resource use that is to be allowed the cap and shares the total among the participating agencies. Now, this scheme also establishes a quantifiable ceiling assigned to each particular for a given period. No one is allowed to emit or basically use more than the amount for which it possesses emission or natural resource use permits. Now, that is a very important consideration and a very important point that needs to be remembered by us all. Now, coming to the carbon markets, like any other market, this market is little different, and it is based on the mechanism for helping mitigate the increasing carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Carbon trading markets are basically developed that bring buyers and sellers of carbon credits together with standardized rules of trade. So, there are certain rules that are set internationally, and according to these rules, carbon credits that are based on and denominated at 1 ton of carbon, that is equivalent to carbon credits that is sold in these voluntary or regular markets. Now, carbon market approach is very much, and it follows the approach of cap and trade system. Now that means that government or body running the carbon market will set an annual cap on the amount of emissions that participants, for example industries or government bodies, can cause, but if their emissions fall under the limit, they are given credits that can be sold in these markets, whereas organizations that emit more than the cap are required to buy the credits in the market. So basically this system runs and allows emission levels to be monitored, and this monitoring helps and incentivizes participants to reduce their national or their individual emission levels. Now on the other hand, as I mentioned, there are critics who have pointed out that there is no proof that carbon markets have reduced emission levels. In particular, they also mentioned that there has been a glut of the available carbon credit. With low prices, it will be very easier for polluters to buy the credits and then change their ways. So now that is a very critical situation to be thought of by the planners and policy makers, and especially international climate scientists and policy makers. Now across the world, there are many global carbon exchanges that are set up. For example, in India, the carbon credits can be traded through a multi-commodity exchange, and this has started right from 2010. There are several such companies that are working and helping and facilitating this carbon exchange setup. There are so many other voluntary markets and exchanges. For example, in Europe, there is European Climate Exchange. In USA, we have Chicago Climate Exchange, that is called as CCX, the International Carbon Bank and Exchange, that is called as ICBE, and many other carbon exchange markets that are available internationally. So what is a carbon offset? A carbon offset is basically and can be considered a reduction in emissions of carbon or greenhouse gases made in order to compensate for or to offset an emission made elsewhere. Now that is an important critical requirement. Carbon offsets can be measured in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, that is called as CO2 E in small, and this basically represents 6 primary categories of greenhouse gases. One carbon offset represents reduction of 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide or its equivalent in other greenhouse gases. So there are basically 2 markets for carbon offsets. In the larger compliance market, mostly companies, governments or other entities buy carbon offsets in order to comply with caps on the total amount of carbon dioxide that are to be allowed and that are allowed to be emitted. So coming to the end, let us try to sum up what we have discussed so far in carbon trading. The most important thing is that tradable permits are an important type and another type of market based policy instruments. These are under which rights to discharge pollution or exploit resources that can otherwise be exchanged through either a free or controlled permit market. These are like taxes, they generate economic incentives for economic agents and they help to move towards a less environmentally harmful behavior. So now that is a very positive approach to reduce GHG emissions and ensure that there is and we are able to regulate carbon budget in the environment. Carbon market is also a market based mechanism for helping to mitigate the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Carbon trading markets are developing and that bring buyers and sellers of carbon credits together with a standardized rule of trade. Now that is going to be more regularized, and in last almost 10 years there has been more formal and regular approach of doing this carbon trading internationally. The carbon market approach actually follows cap and trade system. So that is, there is always a quota and a permit that is allowed to be emitted, and if you have excess carbon sink or carbon sequestration, you can sell it to somebody who has emitted more, and the ones that has emitted more can and has the power to buy can buy it and balance the entire emission and reduction of, or carbon reduction through this process. With this we come to the end of this session on carbon trading and carbon how this trading happens in voluntary markets and non-voluntary markets. I am sure you have learnt a lot in this session, especially basics of this market and functioning. I will look forward to meet you all again with an interesting lecture of MSD 04 Environmental Economics. Thank you so much.